It was the kind of California Saturday that made strangers think every life here was easy. Warm sun on clipped lawns, a soft breeze carrying the smell of jasmine and grilled salmon, the buzz of voices drifting over fences like lazy bees, and inside the stucco bungalow on Oakview, an old man named Will moved carefully in his kitchen, sliding a tray of shortbread from the oven and setting it on the cooling rack the way his late wife, Helen, had shown him decades ago when money was thin and time was thick. He checked the edges for color, lifted one cookie with a spatula, and felt the way heat rose into his fingers like a quiet warning to slow down. Then he straightened his back, wiped his hands on a clean towel, slid the cookies onto a silver platter, and walked toward the patio where his son, Colin, and Colin's wife, Tara, had gathered a crowd of colleagues and neighbors who sounded like they had all been told a secret because they leaned forward when they spoke and laughed a half-second late, as if following a script. Will paused at the threshold and noticed the small details he always noticed. The kinds of details people say do not matter until they do. The way Tara had moved the family photos off the sideboard and replaced them with a low bowl of green limes and a book about modern interiors. The way the mail tray he had made from cedar was gone, and a thin leather folder sat in its place with little colored flags poking out like bright fish fins. The way a man in a linen shirt kept glancing at the back fence line as if measuring distance, and how Colin's smile had the tight pull of a necktie tied one notch too hard. Will stepped out, the sun warmed the top of his head, and he said softly, "Cookies, everyone," with that calm voice he used for birthdays and storms. But only the woman in the linen shirt looked up first, took one bite, and said, "Oh," like a small surprised breath, and then the talking resumed as though the cookies and the old man carrying them were part of the patio furniture. Will held the platter steady and let people reach, nodding when they said thank you. And when his son finally glanced his way, the nod he gave was the kind a person gives to a waiter who brings water to a table already set with wine. A narrow nod that says the service is expected. Will placed the platter near the ice bucket and saw, through the open slider, that the leather folder on the sideboard was not closed after all. It was fanned open, several pages clipped together, a signature line marked with a yellow arrow, a word in bold he could read from here. Transfer. And beneath it, smaller words about a trust and a date and a parcel number that felt like a pebble in his shoe, even though he had not moved. He looked back at Colin, who was telling a joke about a client who refused to stage a house and then lost $50,000 on the sale. And Will thought of how often his son had started to call the bungalow our asset in recent months. Not Dad's place, not the house, but our asset. And how each time Will had let the phrase pass because he did not like to quarrel and because he remembered the boy who used to fall asleep against his shoulder in the blue chair by the front window when a summer thunderstorm scared him. Tara brushed by, leaving a trail of perfume and advice for everyone, and murmured to the linen woman, "Colin is handling the whole estate plan now. It's cleaner." And the woman said, "Of course, clarity is everything." And Will could not tell if they were talking about him or about a stranger, only that the words were smooth in a way that sanded off the edges of people. He stayed long enough to pour a glass of water, long enough to watch his son tilt his glass toward the group and say with a half smirk, "Dad just kind of stays here," which brought a small wave of laughter that sounded like a cough moving through the crowd. And Will kept his face plain, because plain was what dignity looks like when a man does not want to give his hurt an audience. And he turned back inside and did what a careful man does when his hands need work more than his head needs noise. He washed glasses, rinsed plates, stacked them to dry in neat rows, then took a towel and dried the ones that did not need drying. And somewhere between the 9th and 10th glass, he looked up and saw his reflection in the dark window, and noticed how the kitchen light put a faint halo on his white hair, and thought of Helen laughing at that, calling him her saint of small chores. And he allowed himself one small breath of that memory before the slider opened and Colin walked through on his way down the hall, slowing only enough to say, "Thanks, Will." The name hitting his ear the way a mispronounced word does, sharp and a little wrong. And then the hall swallowed the sound and left the kitchen quiet again, except for the hum of the refrigerator. When the last guest left and the patio lights blinked out, Will took the leather folder from the sideboard and did not open it, because a man does not pick up a blade unless he is ready to be cut. He only turned it so the tabs faced down and returned it to the exact spot Tara had chosen. Then he cleaned the lip where a drop of champagne had dried into a dull ring, and he set the house in order the way he always did at the end of a day, checking the front lock, checking the back slider, turning off the stove, switching off the light above the sink. And as he walked to the spare room that had been called his room when he moved in after Helen passed, he realized that the house he had paid off long ago now spoke to him in polite voices that did not use the word home. He sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the ceiling fan turn and felt something cold and thin draw a line in him where heat used to live. A line that said tomorrow he would watch more closely. He would count what was his and what had been slowly claimed with friendly words. He would look for the small marks that tell a story is being written over in a different hand. And the next morning, when the sun came up pale and honest over Oakview, he woke early, put on coffee, and saw the leather folder again, now closed with a gold pen clipped to it, and a tiny sticky note on top with neat letters in Tara's hand that read, "Sign here, just a formality." And the word formality tasted like a word that had been used to make a trap feel like a favor. And he thought, very quietly and very clearly, that whatever this was, it did not begin here on the sideboard. It had begun the moment his son first said asset, the moment Tara first said clarity, the moment somebody moved Helen's photo to a lower shelf and no one said why. And he told himself to move slowly, to keep the day simple, to watch for the next small thing that did not fit. Because mysteries, he knew from reading late at night when sleep would not come, do not arrive as thunder. They arrive as a series of soft clicks, and today he would listen for every single one. The next morning began plain and quiet, the kind of quiet that lets a man hear his own breath. Will woke before the sun cleared the palms on Oakview, made coffee the way he liked, one level spoon, water just off the boil, and stood in the doorway to the dining room, staring at the leather folder on the sideboard with the gold pen across the top and a small sticky note that read, "Sign here, just a formality," in Tara's neat hand. And he understood that whoever had written the note did not know him as well as they thought. He was slow to anger, slow to speak, but he did not sign things he did not understand. So he left the folder where it sat and moved through his small morning routine, wiping the table, watering the rosemary on the patio, folding the dish towel in a square, and each small act helped him think in order. First, find facts. Second, protect what matters. Third, do not argue in rooms where you are outnumbered. By mid-morning, he heard Colin on a speakerphone call in the office, the sliding door half shut, and the words drifted into the hallway like a list of items being placed into a cart. Estate plan, revocable trust, title cleanup, elder care, and then a laugh that was not cruel but careless, followed by, "He's old school, we'll keep it gentle," and Tara saying softer, "Clarity is everything. We need the paperwork, right?" And Will stood there with the mop in his hand and felt something small and hard click into place in his chest. Not rage, not fear, just a lock turning. He put the mop away and took a slow walk down the hall to his room, past the wall where Helen's photo had been moved lower. And he sat on the edge of his bed and looked at the shoebox in the closet where he kept small proofs of a life that had been lived carefully. Tax stubs, warranty cards, the photocopy of the deed he and Helen had signed in 1981, the original tucked years ago into a fireproof pouch at the back of the same box, because Helen had always said, "Paper is where people forget your face unless you keep your name clear." And he touched the pouch but did not remove it, because touching it was enough to remind him he was not powerless. After lunch, Tara came to the doorway with a bright smile that did not reach her eyes and talked about minimizing clutter in shared spaces, and could he please keep his gardening tools in the garage. And while she spoke, Will watched her hands, how they kept smoothing the air like she was ironing out wrinkles in a story. And he nodded once and said he would move the trowel. And he did. Because tools are easy to move, and some fights are not worth the noise. The day slid by, and he kept to himself, made soup, read a chapter from a mystery he'd started the week before, and went to bed early. 3 days after the party, just after 9 in the morning, he reached into the cupboard for his blue flower mug, bumped a tall glass on the drying rack, and watched it fall and burst on the tile in a sound that seemed too loud for a single object. A sharp crack that made the house feel smaller by half. He crouched to gather the shard he could see, one hand braced on the counter, and he was still bent when Colin's footsteps hit the tile like hard rain, quick, angry. And then Colin stood in the doorway, jaw tight, phone in hand, eyes already narrowed as if the scene had arrived to match the feeling he'd been carrying around. "What did you do now?" Colin asked, the tone flat, as if Will had a habit of breaking things on purpose. And Will kept his voice even and said, "It slipped, I'll get it." But Colin lifted a hand the way a man halts traffic and said, "Stop. Just stop. You need to know your place." And the words were simple but heavy, and they made the room tilt. Tara came behind him, arms crossed, leaning to see the glass like she was inspecting a leak in a rental. Will rose slowly, dustpan in hand, and said, "This is my home, your mother and I." And Colin cut him off without looking away. "Don't start with stories, Dad. You don't contribute. You wander at night. You leave messes. We work. We pay for things. We need calm. You're clutter." And the last word felt like a label he had been waiting to stick on something he wanted to move out. Will stared at his son and tried to see the boy who used to hand him nails while he built shelves in the garage, but the man in front of him did not leave space for that memory. Colin rolled the phone in his palm, thumb over the screen like it was a trigger, and said, "Leave now or I'm calling the police." And for a half second, Will thought it had to be a bluff, because who calls the police on their own father in his own paid-off house? But then Colin's thumb tapped and the phone was at his ear, and he said in a calm voice he used with clients, "Yes, I'd like to report a trespasser." And Will did not stay to hear the rest because he understood how words become records that later get used as proof of a story that is not true. He set the dustpan on the counter, walked between Colin and Tara without brushing their sleeves, and stepped onto the cool stone of the patio, the sun not yet high, the rosemary giving off a clean scent when his pant leg brushed it. And he took a breath that filled all the way to his heels, then crossed the yard to the side gate and let himself out. On the sidewalk, the morning air felt honest, and he stood under the jacaranda and looked at the key to the house on his ring, and made a choice to act like the stranger they had declared him to be, which meant no shouting, no scenes, just steps and paper. He walked to the end of the block, sat on the bench at the bus stop, and watched a woman clip a leash onto a small dog that looked like a dust mop. And he felt the shake leave his hands. He pulled his old flip phone from his pocket, the kind he liked because it did not watch him back, and scrolled to the number he had not needed in years. Henry Wells, Helen's friend from church, now retired, once an attorney, who had the steady way of a man who had spent a lifetime telling people to read the fine print. He did not press call yet. He waited for his breathing to be normal and for the bus to pass. And when the bus left a smell of diesel and a stillness behind, he pressed the green button and listened to the ring. No answer. He left a message in a plain voice. "Henry, it's Will. I need to talk about the house." And he closed the phone like closing a small door. He walked 2 blocks to the diner with the red stools and sat at the end, ordered tea and dry toast because his stomach felt tender. And while he ate, he wrote 3 lines on a receipt with the little pencil the waitress gave him. 1, find papers. 2, call agent, not Colin's friends. 3, do not go back alone. After that, he paid in cash, left a good tip because dignity likes company, and took the long route toward the motel next to the freeway he had seen 100 times but never used. As he walked, his mind stayed simple and steady. He would not fight in doorways. He would not be the old man who made a scene so others could call him confused. He would check in, sleep, and tomorrow he would go to the fireproof pouch and gather what mattered. Behind him, the sun moved higher, and the house on Oakview shone like any other house. But Will had already shifted the story in his head from being a man who is allowed to stay to being a man who decides what happens next. And that change, quiet as it was, felt like a lock opening. The motel sat between a freeway on-ramp and a tire shop, the kind of place that took cash without questions and handed you a plastic key card that felt like a thin promise. Will checked in under his full name, signed the line with slow, careful letters the way Helen used to admire, and climbed the outside stairs to a room that smelled faintly of bleach and old air, where the bedspread had a pattern of blue squares that did not line up. He set his small bag on the chair, rinsed his cup at the sink, made tea from a packet, and wrote his 3-point list again on the back of the receipt so the words would sit in his hands. Find papers. Call agent. Do not go back alone. He turned off the lamp and lay in the dim glow of the TV he did not turn on, listening to the freeway hum like faraway surf, and thought of the leather folder on the sideboard, the gold pen clipped proud across the top, the sticky note that had called a trick a formality. And he felt calm move across him the way a tide moves. Slow, sure, leaving behind a clean line. A little before dawn, his phone vibrated on the table, the old flip model jumping as if startled by its own noise. And when he opened it, there was a voicemail from Henry Wells, the name like a steady door in his ear. Will, I'm home this morning. Come by at 8. Bring anything you have. We'll start right. Will rose, made the motel coffee because it was there, washed his face at the small sink, and watched the sky go pale behind the tire shop sign. At 7:30, he locked the door, walked to the bus stop, and rode past streets that used to hold little markers of his life. Hardware store where he bought hinges, bakery where Helen worked mornings, nursery where they asked about Rosemary. Then stepped off near Eagle Rock and followed the smell of lemons to Henry's bungalow. Han, where the lawyer opened the door in socks and a plaid shirt and said, "Come in," instead of "good morning," which was better. They sat at the kitchen table, its wood worn smooth by years of cups, and Henry poured coffee into heavy mugs and listened while Will told the story in simple order. The party, the line about "Dad just kind of stays here," the leather folder, the sticky note, the broken glass, the word clutter, the threat to call the police, the walk under the jacaranda, the motel. Henry didn't interrupt, just nodded once in a while like he was putting books in the right pile, and when Will finished, Henry tapped the table with a short nail and said, "First, you own that house outright." And he asked about the deed. Will told him about the fireproof pouch in a shoebox in the closet, next to the tax receipts and the copy of their marriage certificate and Helen's death certificate. And Henry said, "Good. Paper remembers what people try to forget. We'll retrieve it, we'll secure it, and we'll put this in writing." He pulled a legal pad toward him and wrote a short list in neat block letters. Original deed, tax receipts, utility bills in Will's name, ID, any notes left by Tara or Colin. He explained the simple shape of the law in words that felt like clean broom strokes. A transfer needs the owner's true signature and a notary who sees that signature made. A trust cannot swallow a house if the owner never fed the house into it. Police cannot turn an owner into a trespasser just because someone in a louder voice says so. Elder abuse is not always a bruise. Sometimes it is a form in a pen. Will nodded, the words stacking into something strong enough to lean on. "We will not make a scene," Henry said. "We will collect, document, and leave." And he took his car keys from a cup beside the stove and added, "I'm coming with you." They drove the back streets to Oakview at 10. When Colin would likely be at the office and Tara out for errands, she talked about like appointments. Will sat quiet in the passenger seat, watching familiar corners pass by as if he were a ghost reviewing his route. Henry parked half a block away under a sycamore and said, "You enter with your key. I'll be right behind. We are not sneaking. We're avoiding a fight." And Will patted his pocket where the house key lived and felt a steadying weight. The jacaranda on the lawn had not bloomed yet, its purple still asleep, and the rosemary hedge gave off its clean smell when they moved by it. Will opened the side gate, and the latch made a small click that sounded too loud in his head. The slider was locked, but the back door by the laundry room opened to his key, as it always had. And the house air met him, with that mix of coffee and lemon cleaner that meant someone had wiped counters an hour ago. He walked straight to the hallway, the soles of his shoes soft on the runner Helen had chosen. And in his room, the closet door rolled back with a muted hum. The shoebox sat where he had left it, not tucked farther back, not disturbed. And seeing it felt like seeing a friend still waiting on a bench after the rain. He lifted it, set it on the bed, opened the lid, and there was the fireproof pouch, black with a zipper that caught once before it came smooth, and inside lay the deed with the county stamp, the tax receipts, the certificates, and the small note Helen had left years ago in her looping hand. Paper keeps the promise for us. 3 words underlined twice. Will put everything back into the pouch, added his passport and social security card from the file envelope, and closed the zipper. He took one sweep of the room. 2 shirts, a sweater, socks, the photo of Helen in a garden hat. Because he understood that leaving rage behind is easier when you keep only what you need. Henry, who had stood in the doorway like a patient guard, said, 2 more things, and led him to the dining room where the leather folder still sat. He took out his phone and photographed the cover with its gold pen, the sticky note with just a formality, the flagged pages, a close shot of the word transfer. He slid the folder half an inch to reveal the parcel number clearly and photographed that too. Then he set it back exactly as it had been, so there would be no story about theft. On the sideboard, there was also an appointment card from a bank with Friday circled in blue ink and the words Title Review scrawled. Henry photographed that. They were turning to leave when the front door opened and Tara's voice floated in, speaking to no one. Half laughing about parking, she came into view with a reusable bag on her arm and stopped when she saw them, blinking once as her face tried on 3 expressions in a row: surprise, annoyance, concern, before settling on cool. "What are you doing here?" she asked. But Henry spoke first, his tone smooth as a signed receipt. "Miss Tara, I'm Henry Wells, a retired attorney and an old friend of Helen and Will. We're collecting Mr. Lawson's personal documents and medicine. We'll be in touch about next steps." And he held up his phone just enough for her to notice it. Not like a threat, more like a reminder that this was a record. Tara laughed in a short burst that did not sound like laughter, adjusted the bag on her shoulder, and said, "You can't just come and take things. This is a shared household." And Will answered in the same even voice he used when the garage saw jammed. "This is my home. These are my papers. I'm leaving them with a friend for safekeeping." And he lifted the pouch slightly. Tara's eyes flicked to it, then to the leather folder, then back to Henry. And the room felt like a small stage where everyone had suddenly remembered their lines. "We'll talk with Colin," she said finally, the words clicking together like glass beads, and Will nodded once and said, "We will," which was true in a larger way than she knew. They walked out through the laundry room, closed the door gently, and crossed the yard without hurrying. The sycamore shade felt cooler than before. In the car, Henry exhaled and said, "Good." And Will set the pouch on his lap like a cat that had finally agreed to be carried. They drove back to Henry's house, where he made tuna sandwiches and copied every page on a small printer that wheezed and then worked, and he slid the originals into a new fireproof envelope and wrote Will's full name on it with today's date. "Next," Henry said, tearing the sandwich in half, "we choose a realtor who is not your son's friend, someone fast and clean." He wrote a name on a card, Clara Nguyen, and said, "She grew up near you, sharp as a tack, allergic to drama," and handed Will the card like a key. Will took his phone, pressed the green button again, listened to it ring, and when a woman answered with a voice that sounded like steps on a dry path, he said, "Miss Nguyen, my name is William Lawson. I'd like to discuss selling a house." Clara answered on the second ring with a voice that was clear and quick, and when Will said his name and that he wanted to sell a house, she did not fumble or stall. She asked 2 simple questions. "Do you have the original deed? And are you safe right now?" And when he answered yes to the first and mostly to the second, she said, "Can you meet me in an hour? My office is above Blue Dahlia Florist on Figueroa. There's street parking in the back, and the short, ordinary instructions felt like a handrail to hold." Henry drove, the lemon smell of his bungalow still in Will's shirt, and they climbed the narrow stairs to a room with high windows and a long table laid out with a laptop, a tape measure, a camera, and 2 stacks of forms held neat with binder clips. Clara stood to greet them, mid-30s, hair tied back, a pen behind one ear, the kind of professional calm that meant she had spent more years making order than making speeches. She took copies of the deed, Helen's note, and Will's ID, laid them square, and listened while Will told the story again from the beginning, slower this time, because he was talking not only about a house, but about a line that had been stepped over. Clara didn't interrupt. She underlined dates, circled sticky note, just a formality, and penciled title review app T card Fry in the margin, then asked, "Do you want speed or highest price?" And Will said, "Speed that is fair." And Henry added, "And no drama." And Clara smiled a small smile that said those were her favorite words. She explained the steps in plain order, a listing agreement that gave her authority to market the property, a seller's disclosure that told the truth about the old plumbing and the honest roof, professional photos to show the home in its best light without making it look like a lie, showings by appointment only, proof of funds required, and preference for a clean cash offer, so no lender could be used to slow or twist the sale. She also asked practical questions that felt like kindness. Where? Will wanted sale proceeds to go. A new account at a bank his son did not use. Whether he had medications or keepsakes still in the house. He had taken the papers, the photo, and enough clothes. Whether he had forwarded his mail, not yet, and whether he wanted a locksmith called now or after closing. After, to minimize noise. She slid the listing agreement across, and the word exclusive did not bother him because her steady eyes made it mean responsibility and not control. He signed. Henry co-signed as witness, and Clara turned to her computer and typed with the speed of someone who knew that action itself could be a kind of shelter. At noon, she drove them to Oakview in her small car that smelled like pine, parked under the jacaranda, and walked Will through the gate with a camera around her neck. "We'll move quickly," she said. "I'll take an exterior set first, so we can go live even if we hold interior photos for tomorrow." And Will nodded, opening the back door with his key. The click of the bolt like a clock ticking. Inside, the house was orderly, in the way of people who believe order can keep hard truths away. Counters wiped, cushions aligned, a scented candle with a wooden lid that said sea salt. Clara moved like a person reading a map. Kitchen, dining, living, the sunny front room that had held Helen's bed, the hallway with the runner, Will's small room clean and square now, his bed made, a faint hollow where the shoebox had been. She photographed without moving much, no staging tricks, no pillows pulled. But she noticed the edges. On the sideboard, the leather folder still waited, the sticky note still polite, the gold pen shining like bait. On the refrigerator, a magnet held a bank appointment card with Friday circled, title review, Terra plus C, in blue ink. In the office nook, a legal pad lay open with neat columns labeled trust funding, address change, utilities, insurance. And the first 3 lines were checked. Clara didn't touch anything. She took photos that framed the facts and then stepped back, letting the house breathe. "I'll draft the listing copy tonight," she said softly. "Light-filled bungalow, mature rosemary, porch evenings, first time on the market in 44 years. And the number reached into his chest because it was both a weight and a kind of proof. They left before Tara returned, the laundry room door closing on that clean lemon smell, and drove back to the office where Clara uploaded photos, wrote the description in simple sentences, and set a price she called honest and competitive. Not low enough to look desperate, not high enough to invite long conversations. While she worked, Will's phone buzzed with an unknown number. He let it go to voicemail, and later they listened on speaker to a polite man from a bank asking to confirm that the transfer into the Lawson Family Trust was proceeding Friday at 11, and that Mr. Lawson's attendance would not be necessary due to a valid power of attorney on file. Henry wrote the number onto his pad, then called back from the office line and said, "This is Henry Wells, Mr. Lawson's counsel. There is no valid power of attorney. Any documents you have were not executed by my client. Email them to me now, please, and flag the file for fraud prevention." And the way he said, "please," sounded like a door shutting. A PDF arrived within minutes, scanned pages with a signature that was almost Will's, but not quite, the W too low, the L rising like a different hand had drawn it twice before settling. Henry saved the file, printed it, and wrote forgery, Colin Terra, in the top margin for his own memory. He dialed another number, the title company, on the appointment card, and left a message that put them on notice. Owner disputes unauthorized transfer. Any title action without Will's in-person notarized signature would invite a complaint. When he hung up, the room felt steadier, as if a shape had been drawn around the danger. Clara turned her screen so Will could read the listing one more time, then clicked publish. And for a heartbeat, nothing happened. And then the page refreshed, and his house stood there in little bright rectangles. Living room lit by afternoon sun. The front porch with its chipped rail that looked charming now that a camera had framed it. The rosemary hedge deep green against the pale stucco. "We're live," Clara said, and the word felt like both a fact and a prayer. She set the showing window for the next day. Proof of funds required before any walkthrough. No dual agency allowed. No coming soon games. And she texted 2 buyers she trusted who were known for clean cash. Will sat very still, not because he was afraid, but because stillness felt respectful when a thing you built is being lifted free. He thought of the bank card on the fridge and the word clarity, of the sticky note that called a trap a formality, of his son's voice saying, clutter, and the picture that formed was not complicated anymore. He was not in a fight for love. He was in a process of record. He signed a seller's disclosure that listed the old copper pipes and the heater replaced in '09, and the one rain stain that had never come back but ought to be mentioned anyway. Clara packed her camera, slid documents into a folder with his name on it, and said, "Go back to the motel. Rest. Keep your phone on, but ignore unknowns unless they leave a message worth answering. I'll filter the noise. Henry will handle any paper that barks." And Henry grinned at the phrasing. They walked down the narrow stairs, the florist's cool air rising with the smell of cut stems. And on the sidewalk, Will felt the day change the way a wind changes. Nothing dramatic, just a new direction you can lean into. He and Henry ate late lunch at a corner cafe, tuna on rye again because habit keeps the mind free. And while they ate, Clara's first text arrived. 2 buyers asked to see tomorrow. Both cash. Will update by 6. Followed by a second. Also flagged title. Friday apt, likely canceled. And Will read the words twice and felt that same small click inside. But this time, it was a lock opening. He did not gloat. He did not rehearse speeches. A quiet plan was the shape of his whole day now. At dusk, he returned to the motel, placed the new fireproof envelope under the thin mattress, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the plastic keycard in his palm, until the freeway hum folded into the sound of a sea he had never lived by. He remembered Helen saying, "Paper keeps the promise for us," and he said aloud to the empty room, "We're keeping it," then turned off the lamp and closed his eyes, so morning could come and do its clean work. The next day began like a checklist brought to life. Will woke before the sun warmed the palms, shaved with slow strokes so he wouldn't nick the thin skin under his jaw, drank motel coffee that tasted like cardboard and resolve, placed the fireproof envelope back under the mattress, and walked to the bus stop with Henry's card and Clara's text pinned in his mind. 2 buyers at 10 and 11, proof of funds already verified. He reached Clara's office above the florist 15 minutes early, sat at the long table, and listened while she laid out the plan in short, simple lines that felt like handholds. Curbside preview first, then a brief interior walkthrough using Will's key while the house was empty. No lingering, no talk about the family, just facts and light. At 9:55, she drove him to Oakview, parked under the jacaranda that still hadn't bloomed, and introduced the first buyer at the curb, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a clear way of speaking, who said her name was Diana, and that she wanted a place that had been loved. Clara walked her along the sidewalk, pointed out the deep rosemary hedge, the porch that took evening light, the sturdy roofline, then used Will's key at the laundry door and led them room to room. Kitchen bright, living room square and honest. The front room still holding a sense of quiet, the way a church holds cool air. Diana did not coo or gasp. She stood in each doorway as if listening for a story and then nodded, as if she'd heard it. In the hallway, she paused at the runner and said, "Someone was careful here." And Will felt it like a hand on his shoulder, even though no one touched him. The tour took 11 minutes, Clara keeping time with her eyes. Then they stepped out, locked up, and Diana said she would call her agent within the hour to put terms in writing. They barely had 5 minutes before the second buyer arrived, a man named Patel with a young agent who talked fast and kept checking his phone. Clara ran the same quiet route: curb, hedge, porch, laundry door, kitchen, living, front room, hall. While Will stayed a half pace back and kept his breath even. The agent asked about copper pipes and the heater age, and Clara answered from the disclosure without selling, just naming facts. When they returned to the sidewalk, Mr. Patel said his offer would depend on a contractor's walkthrough tomorrow morning and a small price shave for updates. Clara thanked him, set expectations, clean proof of funds, 10-day close maximum, vacant at possession, and watched them drive away. By noon, Will and Clara were back at the office where she uploaded the lockbox log and typed a short note to both agents. Multiple offer scenario likely. Seller prefers cash, short escrow, no contingencies beyond standard title inspection. Offers due by 4 p.m. While they waited, Henry arrived with sandwiches and new papers. Copies of the forged power of attorney the bank had emailed, his letter demanding the file be flagged for fraud, and a printout of the title company's response. Friday appointment canceled pending owner verification. He placed the pages in a neat stack and said, "Paper is listening," which made Will smile without showing it. At 1:15, Clara's phone buzzed, and her face changed in the way professionals allow it to change only for good news. She angled the screen so Will could read. Diana's agent had sent a clean cash offer over asking by a small, respectful amount. Proof of funds attached. 10-day escrow. Buyer to purchase as is with inspection for information only. No requests for credit. Buyer to accept seller's disclosure as provided. Close conditioned only on clear title. The email ended with one quiet sentence. Buyer recently divorced, wants a home that feels steady. At 2 o'clock, Mr. Patel's agent sent a second offer with a slightly higher headline price, but a request for a 2-week contractor period and a credit for anticipated updates. Clara printed both, set them side by side, and ran a finger down each term. Not for drama, but so a man who had built his life on honest lists could see the differences in clean rows. Will read each line once, then again, and pointed to Diana's offer. "This one," he said, because speed with fairness was what he had asked for, and because the way her agent wrote "steady" felt like a right word in a room that had been full of wrong ones. Henry nodded, initialed his notes, and called the escrow officer he trusted, a woman named Marta, who answered on the first ring and said she could open file this afternoon if the acceptance came by 3. Clara drafted the counter with 2 small clarifications. Close of escrow in 10 calendar days. Buyer to receive vacant possession. Buyer acknowledges ongoing title fraud investigation unrelated to seller's authority, and slid it to Will, who signed with a hand that did not shake. The e-signature pinged back from Diana at 2:37 p.m. Marta opened escrow at 2:52. Wired instructions arrived by 3:05, and a small bell rang on Clara's screen as the buyer's earnest money deposit hit the same day, because some people mean it when they say steady. Once the file number existed and the seller's acceptance sat in Marta's queue, Henry pulled out a second stack labeled occupancy and said, "Next, we end the permission." And he drafted a short, formal letter on Will's behalf revoking Colin and Tara's license to occupy, paired with a notice to vacate, termination of licensee, that cited Will's ownership, the pending sale, and a 7-day window to surrender keys in exchange for a simple courtesy. $200 for professional cleaning if they left the place broom clean with no damage. He added a third letter for good measure, a calm notice to the local police watch commander, stating that the owner had revoked permission for Colin or Tara to represent themselves as decision-makers regarding the property. At 4:10, a courier in a navy polo picked up the envelopes and said he could have signatures of receipt by 6. Will did not watch the clock. He sat with a cup of water and the quiet knowledge that the day now had a shape no one else could bend. At 5:17, Clara's phone buzzed again with a short message from the title company. Owner verified. Fraud alert in place. Any POA presented by third parties to be rejected, absent in-person notarization with Mr. Lawson present. At 5:31, the courier texted 3 photos. Tara at the door, sunglasses in her hair, signing for the packet with a mouth tightened around a line she didn't say. The papers on the sideboard in the background, the same leather folder, the same gold pen, looked suddenly small. At 5:40, a voicemail arrived from Colin, voice flipping from outrage to reason to plea in less than a minute. "Dad, what are you doing? You can't sell the house. We live here. Just call me back. We can fix this. This is crazy." Will did not answer because answering would turn the day into a conversation, and the day needed to stay a record. He finished his water, thanked Clara and Henry for telling the truth on paper, and walked down the narrow stairs past the florist's cool air and the smell of cut stems. The evening held that soft gold that makes everything look like a memory while it is still happening. Back at the motel, he slid the new copies into the fireproof envelope, set it under the mattress again, and sat on the edge of the bed until the freeway sounded like the ocean he had never lived near. His phone lit up with new numbers and old ones, voicemails stacking on voicemails. But he let them pass. He brewed cheap mint tea in the coffee maker because a mint leaf on his balcony was a future he had not bought yet. And he held the warm cup in both hands and thought of Helen's note. Paper keeps the promise for us, and of Diana's 2 words, "wants steady," and of the courier's picture, where the gold pen no longer looked like a plan but like a toy. Outside, the jacaranda would open soon and lay purple on the sidewalk like someone celebrating. But tonight, the tree kept its color, and Will, who had once been told to leave his own home or face the police, sat in a motel room paid by the week and felt the day click shut in a clean way. A buyer chosen, escrow open, permission revoked, a path drawn in ink from what was his to what would be next. The week moved like a slow train that never stopped, each day bringing a new small sound that told Will the plan was still on the tracks. On Monday morning, Clara texted at 8:12 that the buyer's earnest money had cleared, and the inspection would be for information only at 10. And Henry called at 9:03 to say the bank had flagged the forged power of attorney, and the title company had marked the file with a red notice. No action without Will there in person. Will took the bus to Clara's office and sat at the long table while she and the inspector met Diana at the bungalow. He did not go inside because he did not need to. He had already said goodbye to the rooms that mattered. So he walked around the block once and came back to find Clara setting her camera down and saying the inspection had taken 20 minutes, the quickest kind, and that Diana had simply stood in doorways and nodded like she could hear something good. By noon, the report lay on the table with short lines: older copper visible, heater 2009, roof in honest condition, no active leaks. And Diana's agent replied in a sentence that felt like a quiet promise: "No credits requested. Please proceed." At 1, Marta from escrow called, and her voice was steady, the way a road is steady when the grade is right, and she said the buyer had wired the balance for the deposit, and the 7-day clock on the occupancy notice had begun when Tara signed for the courier packet on Friday. Will thanked her, then walked down the narrow stairs, past the smell of cut stems from the florist, and bought a stamped envelope to file a mail forwarding form so bills and letters would follow him, instead of being caught by hands that had tried to rewrite his name. On Tuesday, the for sale sign went up at the lawn's edge, and the jacaranda still held its bloom tight, and neighbors slowed their cars to look and whisper, some kind, some curious, one saying into her phone, "I thought the Sun owned it." And the mystery in their voices did not bother Will because the paper knew the truth. Wednesday brought 3 more voicemails from Colin, each a different shape. First anger, then reason, then pleading. "Dad, what are you doing? This isn't fair. Can we talk?" And one from Tara that sounded tired and thin. "We can work this out if you stop now." But Will did not answer because he and Henry had agreed that all talk would come after paper finished its work. That afternoon, Henry drove him to a small branch bank where Will opened a new account in his own name only and set up a simple wire instruction with Marta so sale proceeds would have a quiet place to land. On Thursday, the 5th day, Henry suggested they take a short drive by Oakview to see if the notice to vacate had stirred action. They parked under a sycamore half a block away and watched a rental van back into the driveway while 2 men in blue shirts carried flat boxes into the house. Tara stepped out in sunglasses that looked too large for her face, gave short directions, then stood with her arms folded as if holding herself together. A neighbor in a straw hat came over and tried to sound helpful, asking if she needed extra tape. Tara shook her head and said something they could not hear. Then Colin arrived, hair uncombed, suit jacket in his hand instead of on his shoulders, and he spoke with quick, moving hands like he was trying to pull a net over a storm. After 30 minutes, the men in blue started carrying boxes back out, the kind of boxes that hold what people think will matter in their next place, frames, shoes, mugs that never matched, and stacked them on the lawn. One of the movers pointed at the for sale sign and said something that made the other shrug. Will sat in the passenger seat with his hands folded to keep them still and remembered Helen's line, "Paper keeps the promise for us," and felt calm settle again. At noon, a marked patrol car rolled slowly down the street and stopped across from the house. A sergeant stepped out and spoke with Colin for a few moments and then walked up to the for sale sign, bent to read the small rider with Clara's name, and tapped something into his phone. Henry tilted his head and said, "Good, the watch commander saw my note." And when the sergeant finished, he looked toward the sycamore, as if he knew exactly where eyes were. Then got back in the car and drove on, leaving behind the kind of silence that says the story now has witnesses. Mid-afternoon, the first thin purple petals fell from the jacaranda like slow confetti, and the movers started loading the van in earnest. Tara slipped inside and came out with a suitcase that dragged, the wheels clicking on the path, and set it near the curb. Colin took a call, listened without speaking, then shut his phone hard and stared at the suitcase like it had rolled there by itself. He walked to the sidewalk and for the first time all week looked up and down the street like he was searching for someone to blame who would also stand still. He spotted the sycamore and started toward the shade with a look that said if he found his father, he would find a handle for the day. Henry saw it and said quietly, "If he comes, we keep it simple. We keep it kind, and we keep it short." And they stepped out of the car before Colin could bang on a window. Colin stopped 3 paces away and said, "Dad," like the word had to be dragged across gravel. Then, "You can't do this." And Will said in a voice as plain as a ledger, "I did not start this." And Henry added softly, "Mr. Lawson owns the home. The sale is lawful. The notice is lawful. Any attempt to interfere will be documented and reported." And the word "documented" was the only hard thing in the sentence. Colin's mouth opened and then closed, his eyes moving like a man searching a shelf where the thing he wants used to be. "We live there," he said finally, and Will nodded once, the nod of a man who knows sorrow does not stop truth, and answered, "Not after 7 days." And then, because he had learned that 1 sentence is stronger than 10, he added, "Paper keeps the promise," and let the words sit. For a moment, Colin seemed smaller inside his clothes. Then he shifted the weight to Tara, saying, "She thought," and stopped because the movers rolled another box past and he had to move his foot. Henry took out a small envelope and held it in view. "Keys on Monday at noon to escrow or to my office," he said. "Broom clean for the cleaning fee." And the way he said "fee" sounded like a bridge if someone wanted to use it. Colin stared at the envelope like it was a trick that might bite, and then looked back up. "I'm going to Mom's," he muttered, not to Will, not even to Henry, but to the air, and turned away, his shoulders dropping in a way that said his plan was no longer a plan. The van door slid down with a metal roar that sounded like a chapter ending. Tara stood at the curb with the suitcase, her sunglasses finally pushed up into her hair so the red around her eyes showed. And she did not speak to Will, and Will did not speak to her. And that silence felt right, not cruel. The movers pulled away. The maple across the way lifted its leaves in a small wind. The house stared back with its blank windows and the for sale sign in front like a simple sentence written in public. Henry touched Will's elbow, and they walked back to the car without looking over their shoulders, because they did not need to. That evening, back at the motel, Clara texted, title clear, "Buyer funds ready. We can close Monday at 11 if keys delivered." And Marta emailed wire instructions with the subject line, "Final confirmation." Will placed the phone face down, slid the fireproof envelope out from under the mattress just to feel its weight before tucking it back, and made mint tea in the little coffee maker again, because the clean taste matched the kind of quiet the room held. He sat on the edge of the bed and watched the freeway lights flow like a slow river, and did not picture the rooms of his old house. He pictured keys on a desk at noon and a printed receipt with his name spelled right and a small clay pot of rosemary on a balcony he did not have yet. And the mystery that had started as a sticky note reading just a formality now felt solved in the plainest way. The formality had been his signature all along, and he had kept it. Monday arrived clear and simple, the kind of morning that makes even a busy city feel freshly washed. Will woke before dawn in the motel, folded the thin blanket to the foot of the bed, slid the fireproof envelope into his canvas bag, and stared for a moment at the plastic keycard on the nightstand as if it could tell him anything new. It could not, which was all right, because today was not about questions anymore. It was about steps. He shaved slowly, put on the blue shirt Helen had always said made his eyes look kind, and took the early bus so he would not have to hurry later. Henry met him outside Marta's escrow office at 10:30 with a small nod and a paper bag that held 2 oranges and a pen that worked. And Clara arrived a few minutes after, hair tied back, a folder under her arm, the kind of professional calm that had carried them all across the week. At 10:50, Marta opened the glass door and led them into a room bright with morning light, where a long table held a notary stamp, the deed packet, and a neat white envelope addressed to Keys, Lawson. The clock on the wall ticked toward 11 with a click that sounded honest. The mystery that had started with a sticky note reading just a formality felt far away now, not because it had disappeared, but because it had been solved with dates and signatures and clear faces. At 10:56, the elevator doors opened, and Diana stepped out carrying a small rosemary plant in a clay pot, the kind that likes sun and regular water. And she smiled a tired, hopeful smile and said, "Good morning, Mr. Lawson," in a voice that sounded like a safe porch. Will said, "Good morning," back, and felt the strange soft ache of handing a home to another person who might treat it gently. At 11:13, after Marta checked Will's ID twice, the notary watched his hand as he signed his full name in 3 places, the same slow letters he had written the first day he and Helen took the house. And then Marta turned the papers to the buyer, and the buyer signed in quick, neat lines that made a new story start. Diana placed the ring of keys on the table without ceremony and pushed them toward Marta, then toward Will for a last look. He glanced at the ring and saw the garage key he had cut himself in '86, the back door key that always stuck a little in winter, and the front door key with the brass worn smooth by a thumb that had been his. He did not touch them. Marta slid the envelope toward him, and he dropped his own copy of the keys inside and pressed the flap until the glue took. At 11:20, he initialed the wire instruction page, and at 11:27, Marta's computer chimed, and she said in a small, pleased voice, "Funding received, recording queued," and 2 minutes later, recorded, and then printed the settlement statement with his name exactly right across the top. The room let out a breath none of them had noticed they were holding. Will did not cheer. He felt something deeper than winning, something like a balance set back where it belonged. Diana asked, very quietly, if she might walk the rooms once before she brought her boxes, and Clara said, "Of course, keys at the desk, possession granted," and they shook hands. No speech, only a look that passed between them that said this house had been loved and would be again. At noon, they stepped outside into light so clean it made the shadows look like tidy shapes instead of threats. And at the curb, a car pulled up fast and then braked hard. Colin got out in a suit that looked like it had slept in the back seat, eyes red at the edges, phone in his hand like a weapon he had forgotten how to use. He walked straight to Will and said, too loud for the sidewalk, "You can't do this, Dad." And Henry stepped half a pace forward with his palm open and said in a voice with no edges, "It is done." And Clara added, as if reading a receipt, "Recorded at 11:29, title clear, possession delivered." And the words sat in the air like small, square stones a man could stand on if he chose. Colin's mouth trembled like he had a dozen sentences and none of them would line up. He tried again, softer. "We live there." And Will nodded once, because sorrow deserved at least that much, and answered, "Not anymore." And then, because he had learned the past week that one clear line is stronger than 10 curved ones, he said, "Paper keeps the promise for us." And let the silence that followed carry the meaning the rest of the way. Colin looked at Henry, then at Clara, then at the glass door with the word escrow printed in white, as if he hoped a loophole would open, and when none did, he made a small sound in his throat, turned, and walked back to the car. The door shut with the soft thud of a plan that had run out of road. After that, Henry drove Will to the bank, and they sat with a teller who clicked keys and confirmed the wire had landed in the new account, then helped Will order a cashier's check for first month's rent and a deposit on a small apartment. Henry's neighbor had mentioned the day before, a 12th floor unit with a narrow balcony and a view of roofs and sky. They stopped at the building on the way back, a quiet place above a bakery that smelled like warm crust, and the landlord, a woman with silver hair pulled into a tidy knot, read the lease out loud in calm sentences. No hidden tricks, month to month, no surprise fees. Will signed, counted the pages, and kept his copy folded flat in his bag. By 3, he had a set of new keys. Light, bright metal, no history yet, and a mailbox number that matched the habit of his mind. He took the elevator up with Henry, unlocked the door, and stepped into an empty room with clean walls and a sliding glass door that led to a narrow balcony where afternoon light lay like a promise. They went back down for 2 trips with his bag and the envelope and the small photo of Helen in her garden hat. And on the 3rd trip, they stopped at the corner nursery and bought a mint and a rosemary in cheap clay pots because Will liked how the scents spoke different kinds of clean. By 5, Henry had gone home with a clap on the shoulder and a promise to check in tomorrow. And Will stood alone in his new place, poured water into the 2 pots, and set them on the rail where the breeze could visit. He boiled water in a small kettle the landlord had left in a box marked, "Use me," crushed a mint leaf between his fingers the way he had done in his head all week, and watched the city soften into evening. At 7:30, the intercom buzzed and he went to the screen. The camera showed Colin below in the halo of the entrance light, hair untidy, jaw tight, holding nothing this time, no plan in his hand, only his face. "Dad," he said into the speaker, his voice sanded down. "I'm sorry. Please let me in, just for a little while. I don't know where to go." And Will stood still long enough to feel the pull that comes with blood and years, and all the small days that build a family. And then he went to the balcony, where the air felt honest, and he looked down, and Colin looked up, and hope leaped across his face like it used to when Will showed up at a school play. Will let the quiet stand between them until it was strong enough to hold the truth. Then he said, soft but not bending, "Don't ever think you can trick an old man, especially your own father." And the words were not a door slamming. They were a door that stayed locked because locks exist for a reason. He turned back inside, pressed the button that ended the call without anger, and drew the curtain. The kettle clicked as it cooled. He poured tea, sat by the window, and thought not about winning or losing, but about boundaries and names, and how mystery is sometimes only a pile of small wrong things that add up to a large wrong, and how the answer, when it comes, is not a speech, but a record, a deed, a date, a signature, a key returned, a new key given. He looked at the mint and rosemary, breathed in their clean smell, and felt something like a room inside him tidy itself. He would not gloat and he would not erase the past. He would sleep and wake and write a short letter to Colin later, not to invite a fight, but to set the story straight in simple sentences. A man can read when his life gets loud again. For now, he finished his tea, washed the cup, folded the towel over the sink, and stood on the balcony as the city lights stitched themselves into neat lines. He had left when threatened. He had called the realtor instead. And the man who thought age meant surrender had learned that age can also mean a steady hand with a pen. The night air moved over the new keys in his pocket with a small, honest weight, and he let it be enough.